Okay, so, you sent over this episode of the Positive Mindset podcast, and wow, it really got me thinking, like, is attitude really everything? What does that even mean, practically speaking?
Right. Everyone's always talking about good vibes, positive vibes only. It's almost like a cliche at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I loved about this podcast episode. They really got me thinking about going beyond just the buzzwords.
Yeah, totally.
It's not enough to just talk about good vibes.
Right.
We need to understand how it actually, like, works,
Yeah.
the mechanisms.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where, it gets really interesting because we're really talking about how our minds work. Our minds are incredible filtering systems, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And how they interpret, how they filter, how they perceive, the world around us.
And that's really what hit home for me was that example uh, about the two people facing the same setback. I think they were both like entrepreneurs or something.
Right, right.
And one person, their world just crumbles, right? Sees it as like total failure.
Total failure, yeah.
But the other person, same exact situation, they're like, okay, this is a learning opportunity.
Right.
Same event, totally different experience. And it all comes down to attitude. Have you noticed that in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
we all have, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it boils down to this, thing called the negativity bias,
Okay, negativity bias.
which essentially means that our brains, you know, they're kind of hardwired to focus on the negative.
Wait, our brains are wired for negativity. Why would that be?
Well, if you think about it from like an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense, right?
Okay.
Back in the cave-dwelling days, paying attention to threats was crucial for survival.
Right. Saber-toothed tigers.
Exactly. Exactly. So, that negativity bias, it's deeply ingrained. But, and this is the good news,
Okay, good.
we're not stuck with it.
Okay.
We can actually train our attention.
So how do we do that? Is that where, like, gratitude comes in? Because I know the podcast hosts, they talked a lot about gratitude.
Yeah, absolutely. And your gratitude, it's not just about, feeling good for a moment. It's like strength training for your brain.
Oh, I like that.
You know,
Mental fitness.
Every time you focus on something that you're grateful for,
Yeah.
you're literally strengthening the neural pathways
Right.
associated with, those positive emotions.
So it's like we're building mental muscle.
Exactly.
I love that. And it's funny, they actually use that phrase, attitude is a muscle, in the podcast, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. But I have to admit, like, sometimes it feels more like a weakling than a powerhouse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Well, think about it this way, right? You wouldn't expect to, like, deadlift a heavy weight without, like, consistent training.
Right.
Right. You can't just expect to have this, like, unshakably positive attitude without, putting in the work.
So true. So, like, what are some practical things people can do to, strengthen that attitude muscle? Besides gratitude, obviously.
Well, they talked a bit about affirmations in the podcast
Yeah.
and setting daily intentions, which I thought was really interesting
Okay, yeah.
because those are such simple practices, right?
Heck.
But they actually tap into this whole fascinating area of, like, neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity. See, now you're speaking my language. I love all that brain stuff.
Yeah.
It's basically like our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
Exactly. Like, imagine your brain is like a garden.
Ooh, I like that.
Right. The more you water certain pathways,
Yeah.
the more those pathways are going to flourish. So every time we choose a positive thought or a positive feeling or we take a positive action,
Yeah.
we're essentially watering those pathways in our brains.
Wow.
Right.
Right.
Making them stronger, making them more likely to, bloom again in the future.
So by consciously focusing on the positive, even in small ways, we're literally rewiring our brains to be like more optimistic, more resilient.
Exactly. It's really amazing, actually.
That is pretty cool.
And, they talked about starting the day with intention, right?
Yeah.
And that really aligns with this whole idea of neuroplasticity. Because how we begin our day, it really can, kind of set the tone for everything that follows.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe no more like doom scrolling before bed.
Probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, because who needs their brain like marinating in all that negativity right before you go to sleep?
Exactly. And speaking of influences,
Oh, yeah.
the episode, they also talked about, like, the company we keep.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's such an important point. Surrounding yourself with, positive influences.
Right, like that whole thing about you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But, thinking about that whole, like, two people, same setback thing, it's not like the person with the positive attitude, they just, like, magically wished away all the challenges, right? Or just surrounded themselves with yes men.
Right. Of course not.
Yeah.
And that's an important distinction, right? Because it's not about, avoiding all negativity or, existing in this like echo chamber of positivity.
Yeah.
Because frankly, trying to force positivity all the time, that can actually backfire.
Right.
Yeah, it's not sustainable.
So it's not about ignoring the negative. It's more about, like, how you respond to it. And, I guess who you choose to have in your corner when things, inevitably get tough.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. It's about being, I guess, a little bit selective about who we allow to kind of influence us.
Right.
Seek out people who, not only celebrate the good times, but also like model resilience.
Right.
And offer constructive support during, those challenging times.
Yeah. Surround yourself with people who, lift you up, challenge you to grow.
Yeah.
And, help you see possibilities, even when you're feeling stuck.
Absolutely.
It's like having, people watering those positive pathways right alongside you.
I love that. Yeah.
I just came up with that pretty good.
That's great.
But what about, those off days? We all have them.
Of course. Yeah.
Is it even possible to, like, stay positive when you're dealing with setbacks and disappointments and, all that stuff?
Right. That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Life's not always, sunshine and rainbows. It definitely isn't.
And, the podcast, they acknowledge that, but they also talk about, like, bouncing back from challenges. And is that even realistic?
Oh, it's totally realistic.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that, attitude as a muscle idea. Just like we train our physical muscles, right, to get stronger.
Yeah.
We can train our attitude muscle to be more resilient. Remember those two people, facing that same setback?
Yeah.
It's not that the positive one didn't struggle.
Right.
It's that they'd kind of built up that mental strength,
Yeah,
right? To kind of navigate that challenge more effectively.
So how do we do that? How do we build up that that mental resilience, for when those inevitable tough times hit?
Well, it starts with awareness, really. Pay attention to the stories that you're telling yourself, especially in those moments of challenge.
Yeah.
Are those stories empowering or are they limiting? Because those internal narratives, the thoughts that are kind of swirling around in our heads, they have a really powerful impact on how we, experience the world, how we respond to the world.
It's funny you say that. I was reading this book and they were describing, like, our thoughts almost like software running in the background of our minds.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And if we don't, like, update the software, we just get stuck in these, like, negative thought loops.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, because, like, we wouldn't hesitate to, upgrade our phones with the latest software, right? So we can also kind of, upgrade our internal operating systems, so to speak.
I love that.
Right. And becoming aware of those default thought patterns. That's the first step. Really crucial.
So once we're aware of those thought patterns, how do we hit the update button, so to speak? Like, how do we actually shift to a more kind of empowering mindset, especially when it feels like everything's, like, going wrong?
It sounds simple, but sometimes just like a small shift in perspective, can make all the difference.
Yeah.
So, next time you're facing a challenge, instead of kind of getting swept away by that what if it all goes wrong narrative, just ask yourself, like, what if it goes right?
Ooh, I like that.
Right. Or what can I learn from this experience? And even if it feels a little bit forced at first, consciously choosing to focus on that more empowering thought, that can really start to shift those neural pathways over time.
Yeah. It's like choosing to watch, like, a feel-good movie instead of, like, a, doom and gloom documentary.
Exactly.
Sometimes you just need a change of scenery in your own head.
Love it. Yeah. You have more control over that internal environment than you might realize.
This has been amazing. So as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive on attitude, what's the one thing you want our listeners to really take away from this?
I think it's important to remember that attitude is not about, denouncing the negative. It's not about slapping on a fake smile. It's really about recognizing that we have a choice in how we respond to life's inevitable challenges.
Yep.
It's about cultivating that awareness of our thoughts, practicing gratitude, surrounding ourselves with supportive people, and really consciously choosing that more, empowered perspective. And remember, just like any skill, it takes practice. Be kind to yourself, celebrate the small wins, and never underestimate the power of your own mind.
I love that. This was fantastic. So that is a wrap on our deep dive into the power of attitude. Hopefully, you got some good stuff out of it. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, keep diving deep into all that cool stuff.